This is our new housing minister, Claire O'Neil. I've used a bit of a sneaky photo, obviously, looking a bit sinister there. But she's actually a failed Home Affairs minister. And why is it that she's failed? She failed because she delivered the biggest surge in net overseas migration in Australia's history. Yet she's now become Australia's housing minister. This is really funny stuff. So in the Albanese government's first federal budget in October 2022, Labor predicted, well, the federal budget, I should say, predicted that we'd have net overseas migration of about 470,000 over the first 2 years. And guess what? We actually got 980,000 over the last 2 years. So it was pretty much double, well, a little bit over double what Labor projected in their first federal budget. You can see the chart at the bottom there. Absolutely unbelievable explosion in net overseas migration, off the charts, literally, like we'd never seen before. And it's also worth pointing out that since Australia's net overseas migration was ramped up in the mid-2000s, so around about 2005, Australia's actually led the developed world in population growth. So I've got a chart here from using World Bank development indicators. Now, it only goes to, it's not totally up-to-date data. It's a little bit lagged, it's probably a year behind, but based on that, Australia's population grew by 32% between 2005 and 2023, according to the World Bank, and that's higher than Canada, 24%, New Zealand, way higher than the OECD total of 12%, United States, United Kingdom, Euro area. Well, we've had this ginormous population growth, obviously, which I talk about every time I'm on this show. We got 650,000 roughly population growth last year, 2.5% annual growth rate, which is the highest since 1952. So, is there any wonder why Australia has a rental crisis currently? So, interestingly, the chart on the left and the chart on the right. So, I've got the chart on the left is temporary visa holders in Australia. The chart on the right is asking rents from SQM. It's a hell of a correlation, I would have thought there, Martin. What do you think?
It looks suspicious, doesn't it? Are you saying that there's some correlation between high migration and rise in rents and all of those things? Funny that.
Yeah, I don't know how that could be. I don't know how it could be because all the supply side boosters, the Peter Tulips of this world, the tulip bubbles, like to tell us that it's a supply side only housing market, and that's what Claire O'Neil likes to tell us as well. So hilariously, our esteemed former Home Affairs Minister turned Housing Minister Claire O'Neil has repeatedly attacked the coalition government. Ever since she got into office and beforehand, before Labor even won, over the massive surge in temporary migration under the coalition, and that Australia had become permanent temporary migration and economy and how terrible it was and all this sort of stuff. And yet the number of temporary migrants under her government has increased by about 500,000 from what it was in 2019 before the pandemic, which was the peak then. So that's showing clearly the chart on the left that comes from Justin Farbo at Antipodean and Macro. And as a result, rents exploded. Funny that. And so here's the question for you. Well, for everyone, I should say. Why do you think Claire O'Neil was made Australia's housing minister, given she'd stuffed up immigration so badly and delivered us the rental crisis effectively? Well, here's why. This was reported in the ABC, and according to an Albanese government spokesperson, Labor needed a, quote, stronger communicator at a time when anger about housing is at record highs. The government believes the housing portfolio needs its strongest, sharpest public performer since the housing debate has largely been lost by Labor. So what does that tell you, guys? And ladies and gentlemen, I should say. It tells you that they needed someone who was good at political spin. So they don't actually want to fix the problem, because if they want to do that, they'd probably look at the immigration side first, because given that, you can't, it's pretty hard to provide enough housing for an extra 650,000 people in a year. But they care more about political spin. And, O'Neil's already out there banging on about supply. She did an op-ed in Fairfax over the weekend, or she was quoted in Fairfax widely about how it's just terrible. It's intergenerational injustice that we don't have enough housing and all this sort of stuff. Didn't once mention immigration, which she stuffed up. And this is why the whole situation is an absolute joke. And meanwhile, if you don't mind, just swing you back for 1 second, just to add to the point. We've all seen, Albo's mythical housing target. So just as anyone who's fresh, new to this issue, the Albanese government last year went to National Cabinet, talked to all the premiers and that sort of stuff, came out of the National Cabinet and said, I've got the solution. I'm going to fix the housing crisis. Australia is going to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years. We're going to build 20,000 homes a month, 240,000 homes a year, or 200, for 5 consecutive years. Now, the chart on the right shows Australia's record, history of housing dwelling completions in Australia. And Australia's highest ever year of dwelling completions was 2017, when we built 223,500. And we've got Albo's target there in the red. So our highest year in history in 2017 was 7% below Albo's target for 1 year. And that was when we had interest rates of 1.5% versus 4.35% currently. That's when we had construction costs are about 40% lower than they are now, Martin, because the pandemic hadn't come along yet. We also built in, if you actually look at the type of supply that we built, it was a lot of that crappy high-rise, dog boxes in Sydney and Melbourne, which end up being, wrapped in flammable cladding, have balcony defects, have water damage, leaks, all this sort of stuff. Sort of stuff that basically is rubbish. We had Opal Towers, Mascot Towers with huge structural defects. People have been left with shoddy apartments, left basically burning their savings, life savings. It's got to spend tens of thousands of dollars getting these shoddy apartments fixed. But even with those shoddy apartments going up like ticky-tacky, we still only built 223,500 homes. And yet Albo, the brainiac, seems to think that magically, with 40% higher construction costs, higher interest rates, 3,000 builders roughly going bust in the last year, and builders competing for labour and capital and resources and material against big build infrastructure projects, that we're going to magically build 240,000 homes a year. Now, unfortunately, Martin, it's not going too well because, as the chart on the left shows, Australia's current dwelling construction is tracking about 1/3 below Labor's target. So last year we built about 170,000 homes, and dwelling commencements is tracking way below that. It's tracking about 160,000. Approvals about 160 as well. So we're tracking, we already missed the target by, 170, 240. Yeah, so was it 70,000 last year, and we're tracking the forward indicators are nearly 80,000 behind. So we don't have a snowflake's chance in hell of beating this target.
I'll tell you something, Lee. You might be interested. The UK just announced a 5-year building program of 1.5 million homes, all right, in the UK over the next 5 years. And in fact, last year they managed to build 320,000, I think it was, which was a peak year in the UK. So it's a stretch target. But it's interesting if you compare the number that we've built in recent years in Australia and the UK relative to the population, Australia's done way better than almost anywhere. So it's not like we haven't been building, right?
No, and
we're not building enough. We can't do it.
Mate, you can't keep up with this obscene population growth.
Yes.
That's the fact of the matter. And anyone who tries to argue otherwise, the Peter Tulips of this world, you just look at the empirical evidence. Like look at what has happened in the last 20 years of this big Australia rubbish. Like the fact of the matter is we just haven't done it. We haven't built enough housing. We haven't built enough infrastructure. We haven't built enough hospitals. We haven't built enough schools. Meanwhile, we're now so my area in Ashburton, Melbourne, it's pretty low density, but pretty much every house that gets knocked down now is replaced with 2 or 3, right? It's not happening at a certain pace or anything, but every time that happens, we lose trees. So I went for a walk today with my wife because luckily Melbourne's weather's been absolutely beautiful the last few days, 21 degrees sunny today. So hence I got a bit of a August tan, which is unusual. But walking around now, you walk past, there's a block that gets leveled, all the trees get leveled. So how much green space are we losing doing this? And here's the thing, Martin. So the Victorian government, Melbourne's population at the turn of the century was 3.5 million people. It's now about 5.3 million. So it's added, massive amount of 1.8 million people this century. According to the state government's own forecasts, Melbourne's population is supposed to go to 9 million by 2056. So that's in 56 years, it will have gone from, if these forecasts come to fruition, that is, will have gone from 3.5 million to 9 million in 56 years. So it took Melbourne 170 years to get to 3.5 million people, and then it's supposed to go to 9 million, right, in just 56 years. Like, this is just insane growth. And under the Victorian government's own housing plan, Melbourne, or should I say Victoria, is supposed to add 2 million homes in its existing urban footprint in that period of when we're meant to go to 9 million. So that means that effectively for every 2 houses in Melbourne, we're going to add another house in existing areas. Like, how can you do that without completely changing the character of the city, the footprint of the city, without tearing up gardens and trees and everything else to make way for the development? It's just not possible. And yet this is Australia's plan here. Like, it's not just Melbourne, it's Sydney. Like Sydney, the Urban Task Force projections. So Sydney, as of the 2016 census, had about, I think it was 57% detached housing, maybe it was 56%. And by 2057, which is the Urban Task Force projections, Sydney's detached housing was supposed to go from like 56 or 57% down to 25%. And then apartments were supposed to take up half of your entire dwelling stock in Sydney, with the townhouses making the rest. You know, basically 25% detached houses, 25% townhouses, 50% apartments. That is a ginormous change in a relatively short period of time. What it basically means is that, you know, forget the Australian dream, but you're going to have 25% of households in Sydney living in a detached house with a backyard, and everyone else is going to be living in high density or higher density. Well, is this what we want? I don't think it is. And this is Australia's plan. This is Australia's plan. Just keep growing like a science experiment, keep ramming up the cost of housing, convert everyone into, you know, shoebox living, group housing, bloody tiny homes, granny flats, whatever it is. And that's supposed to be a betterment of our living standards. And we're supposed to somehow, like all the immigration boosters, the Peter Tulips of this world, you know, all these other charlatans, try and say that, they try and gaslight you into saying that this is good for you. You know, this is good for your welfare, and this is good for your standard of living, and it's going to be good for your children and grandchildren. I've got something to tell you, mate. It's not.